In the last 23 years, the United States has invaded, bombed, sanctioned, or forcibly seized the leader of 4 oil-producing nations. Iraq, 2003. Libya, 2011. Iran under permanent economic siege. And on January 3, 2026, Venezuela, where American special forces captured President Nicolas Maduro in a nighttime raid and flew him to New York in handcuffs. The official reasons were always different. Weapons of mass destruction, humanitarian intervention, nuclear proliferation, narco-terrorism. But every single one of these countries did the same thing before they were destroyed. They tried to sell their oil in something other than US dollars. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And once you see the pattern, everything else, the wars, the sanctions, the alien hearings, the Epstein files, all of it is noise designed to keep you from connecting these dots. (1944) Bretton Woods. In July 1944, delegates from 44 nations met at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, as World War II was ending. The United States, the only major economy with its infrastructure intact, dictated the terms of the post-war financial system. The agreement pegged every major currency to the US dollar, and the dollar itself to gold at $35 per ounce. This made the dollar the mandatory medium for international trade. If you wanted to trade globally, you needed dollars. 1960s, the cracks. By the 1960s, America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. Vietnam War spending, Great Society programs, and growing trade deficits drained US gold reserves. France's President Charles de Gaulle began demanding physical gold in exchange for dollars, exposing the gap between America's promises and its reserves. August 15, 1971. Nixon closes the gold window. President Nixon unilaterally severed the dollar's link to gold, ending the Bretton Woods system. The dollar was now backed by nothing tangible. Global confidence in the currency began to erode, and America needed a new mechanism to force the world to keep holding dollars. 1973. The OPEC embargo. The 1973 Arab-Israeli War triggered an OPEC oil embargo against the United States and its allies. Gas lines stretched for blocks, the economy stalled, inflation spiked. The dollar weakened further. 1974. Kissinger's masterstroke. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh with an offer for the Saudi royal family. The terms, formalized in June 1974, created the petrodollar system. Saudi Arabia would price and sell all of its oil exclusively in US dollars. OPEC would follow Saudi Arabia's lead, making virtually all global oil transactions dollar-denominated. The resulting petrodollars would be recycled back into US Treasury bonds and American financial markets. In exchange, America would provide Saudi Arabia with military protection, advanced weapons systems, and an implicit guarantee of the royal family's survival. How the cycle works. The petrodollar created a self-reinforcing loop. Every nation on Earth needed to acquire dollars, not because they wanted American goods, but because they needed oil. Countries earned dollars by exporting to America, then spent those dollars buying oil from OPEC nations, who then invested the proceeds back into US Treasury bonds. The United States was being funded by global oil consumption it did not even control. This gave America what French economist Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called exorbitant privilege, the ability to print the world's reserve currency, run permanent trade and budget deficits, and finance a military larger than the next 10 nations combined, all without the normal consequences of overspending. 2000 to 2003. Saddam Hussein and the Euro Gambit. In November 2000, Iraq's Saddam Hussein announced that Iraq would begin selling oil in euros instead of dollars through the United Nations Oil for Food program. This was widely dismissed as a symbolic gesture from a sanctioned dictator. It was not symbolic. If other OPEC members followed Iraq's lead, global demand for dollars would decline, weakening America's ability to finance its deficits and military. Within 3 years, the United States invaded Iraq on the pretext of weapons of mass destruction, weapons that did not exist. Among the first administrative acts of the Coalition Provisional Authority was reverting Iraqi oil sales back to dollars. 2009 to 2011. Muammar Gaddafi and the gold dinar. Libya's Gaddafi pursued something even more ambitious than Saddam. As president of the African Union in 2009, he proposed the gold dinar, a pan-African currency backed by Libya's 143 tons of gold reserves. The gold dinar would serve as the mandatory currency for purchasing African oil and resources, displacing not only the dollar, but also the French CFA franc, which had kept former French colonies economically dependent on Paris for decades. Countries including Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Angola expressed interest. According to leaked emails from then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's private server, a memo from advisor Sidney Blumenthal explicitly cited Gaddafi's gold reserves and the gold dinar plan as factors motivating the intervention. French President Sarkozy was reportedly deeply alarmed by the threat to the CFA franc. In March 2011, NATO intervened in Libya on humanitarian grounds. Gaddafi was captured and killed in October 2011. Libya collapsed into civil war and remains fractured to this day. The gold dinar died with Gaddafi. The Wesley Clark Revelation. 7 countries in 5 years. In 2007, retired 4-star General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, publicly described a conversation he had at the Pentagon shortly after September 11, 2001. A senior officer showed him a classified memo from the Secretary of Defense's office outlining plans to destabilize and overthrow the governments of 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. Clark later described a 1991 conversation with Paul Wolfowitz, then the number 3 official at the Pentagon, who told him, "We learned that we can use our military in the region and the Soviets won't stop us. We've got 5, maybe 10 years to clean up those old Soviet surrogate regimes before the next superpower emerges to challenge us." The list of 7 countries is not random. Every single one either challenged the dollar system, maintained oil independence from Western control, or blocked American access to energy corridors. Venezuela, notably, would become what some call the unofficial 8th target, a late addition to the same strategic logic. The pattern is now established. Challenge the dollar's monopoly on oil trade equals regime change, invasion, or destruction. – 2007. The Iranian Oil Bourse. Iran launched the Iranian Oil Bourse in 2007, a commodity exchange designed to trade oil in currencies other than dollars. It accepted euros, yen, yuan, and even facilitated barter deals. This was a direct structural challenge to the petrodollar, not a symbolic gesture like Saddam's. 2012-present, the China-Iran-Yuan pipeline. Beginning in 2012, Iran and China signed a series of agreements to trade oil directly in yuan, completely bypassing dollar-denominated channels. Iran exports approximately 1.5 million barrels of oil per day when sanctions are evaded, with the vast majority going to China. At roughly $80 per barrel, this represents approximately $43 billion annually, flowing entirely outside the dollar system. Despite over 3,800 US sanctions on Iranian entities, Iran has built a sophisticated sanctions evasion infrastructure. Ghost tankers disable GPS transponders and conduct ship-to-ship transfers in international waters. Shell companies registered in Malaysia, Hong Kong, and the UAE obscure ownership. Barter deals trade oil directly for Chinese electronics, Russian wheat, and other goods. Some transactions are reportedly settled in cryptocurrency. Why the volume doesn't matter, the precedent does. Iran's $43 billion in annual non-dollar oil sales is modest relative to the roughly $2 trillion global oil market. But the significance is not in the volume. It is in the proof of concept. Iran has demonstrated year after year that a nation can sustain its oil export economy entirely outside the dollar system. Every yuan oil sale proves that the dollar is not necessary, and that proof is contagious. China's strategic interest. China imports roughly 70% of its oil, approximately 11 million barrels per day. Iranian oil serves China's strategic interests in three ways. First, geography. Iran offers potential land-based pipeline routes through Pakistan and Central Asia that bypass the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca, both of which are controlled by US naval power. In a conflict, America could blockade China's seaborne oil, unless China has secured overland alternatives through Iran. Second, price. Because of sanctions, Iran sells oil to China at a 15 to 20% discount, saving China billions while filling its strategic petroleum reserve. Third, yuan internationalization. Every barrel purchased in yuan from Iran builds demand for the yuan outside China's borders, slowly chipping away at dollar hegemony. Venezuela, the world's largest oil reserves. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, approximately 303 billion barrels, surpassing even Saudi Arabia. Under President Hugo Chavez, who came to power in 1999, Venezuela began a deliberate pivot away from dollar dependence and toward China. 2007 to 2015, the China-Venezuela loans for oil machine. In November 2007, Chavez and Chinese President Hu Jintao signed the framework agreement for the China-Venezuela Joint Fund. This was not ordinary foreign aid. It was a revolutionary financial architecture designed to bypass the Western banking system entirely. The structure worked as follows. China Development Bank provided loans to Venezuela, ultimately totaling over $60 billion in commitments by 2015. Venezuela repaid these loans not in dollars, but in physical barrels of crude oil shipped to China. At its peak, Venezuela was sending between 300,000 and 500,000 barrels per day to service its Chinese debt. The implications were enormous. This was a $60 billion financial relationship conducted entirely outside the dollar system. No dollars were earned. No dollars were spent. No dollars flowed through Western banks. The Chinese Development Bank's exposure to Venezuela became the largest single-country lending position anywhere in the world. A $60+ billion bet on a non-dollar oil future. The full bypass. How the Venezuela-China system worked. Between 2007 and 2023, China's total loans, investments, and financial commitments to Venezuela reached an estimated $105.6 billion, according to aid data. This funded everything from railways and satellite systems to agricultural programs and military equipment. Chinese state-owned companies held stakes in Venezuelan oil consortiums covering billions of barrels of reserves. CNPC and Sinopec maintained direct equity positions. By the time US sanctions began to seriously bite in 2019, China had become the dominant buyer of Venezuelan oil, purchasing an estimated 300,000 to 470,000 barrels per day. By November 2025, the month before the US naval blockade, China was receiving 778,000 of Venezuela's 952,000 barrels per day in exports. That is 81.7% of Venezuela's entire oil output going to China, settled in non-dollar currencies, processed by Chinese independent teapot refiners to avoid sanctions risk. 2017. Maduro drops the dollar entirely. In September 2017, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro announced that Venezuela would no longer accept or offer US dollars for oil sales. Oil basket prices were published in Chinese yuan. Maduro called it freeing the nation from the oppression of the dollar. Analysts at the time dismissed this as self-destructive posturing. Within the logic of petrodollar enforcement, it was a death sentence. The Petro, Venezuela's crypto challenge. In February 2018, Venezuela launched the Petro, a state-backed cryptocurrency ostensibly backed by oil reserves. The US Treasury immediately banned American citizens from transacting in it, and Executive Order 13827 specifically prohibited all transactions related to any digital currency issued by the Venezuelan government. This was not about the Petro's viability. It was about the precedent, a sovereign nation creating a digital instrument to trade oil outside the dollar system. December 2025, January 2026. The plug. Beginning in September 2025, US military forces began striking vessels in the Caribbean under counter-narcotics justifications. In December 2025, this escalated to the direct seizure of sanctioned oil tankers carrying Venezuelan crude, including, notably, the tanker Centuries on December 20th, which was not even on any official sanctions list. The US was no longer enforcing sanctions, it was conducting a naval blockade. On January 3, 2026, US Special Operations Forces captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife in a nighttime raid on his compound in Caracas, codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve. Approximately 150 aircraft were involved. Maduro was flown to New York to face narco-terrorism charges. Cuban military personnel present at the compound were killed. Their presence in Venezuela confirmed publicly for the first time. President Trump stated the US would run Venezuela. Secretary Rubio indicated the US would direct oil sales and revenues. An energy deal was structured in which the United States would market and sell Venezuelan oil, with proceeds deposited into US-controlled accounts. Defense Secretary Hegseth stated, "He effed around and he found out." The subtext was not subtle. Venezuela's oil was being redirected from Chinese yuan channels back into dollar-denominated ones under direct American military control. What China lost. The capture of Maduro represented a massive strategic loss for China. In one operation, the United States severed China's access to 778,000 barrels per day of non-dollar oil, threatened $17 to $19 billion in outstanding Venezuelan debt to China, endangered $2.1 billion in Chinese oil sector investments, and eliminated a key partner in China's Latin American influence strategy. China's foreign ministry condemned it as a violation of sovereignty. But without military assets in the Western Hemisphere to respond, Beijing could do nothing. Move 1. Maximum pressure on Iran. Reinstated and expanded sanctions targeting Chinese companies buying Iranian oil. Secondary sanctions on banks processing Iranian transactions. Goal: choke the yuan oil flow from the eastern leak. Move 2. Venezuela naval blockade and capture escalating from tanker seizures to a full military operation. Goal: physically sever the Western leak, eliminate the largest non-dollar oil pipeline in the Western Hemisphere, and redirect Venezuelan oil to US control. Move 3. Abraham Accords expansion, normalizing relations between Israel and Arab states, creating an anti-Iran coalition while simultaneously binding Gulf states closer to the dollar system. The India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, was designed to redirect Middle Eastern trade away from Chinese Belt and Road infrastructure. Move 4. Targeting central banks. Direct threats against Iran's central bank, the node that facilitates all sanctions evasion oil sales. In Venezuela, the seizure of PDVSA's export infrastructure and the redirection of oil revenues into US-controlled accounts achieved the same goal, cutting off the financial nerve center. Move 5. The anti-CBDC domestic move. In 2025, Trump signed an executive order halting all work on a US retail CBDC, making America the only major economy to do so. This is often misread as libertarian skepticism, but it serves the strategy. By blocking a domestic retail CBDC while allowing wholesale cross-border CBDC research to continue through Project Agora, the administration maintains dollar primacy in cross-border settlements while preventing programmable money from being used against American citizens domestically. The CBDC weapon is for export, not domestic use. Every single move is designed to close the leaks before the $300 trillion tokenization transition. This is not foreign policy. It is a financial perimeter defense operation. June 9, 2024, the date nobody noticed. The 50-year US-Saudi Economic Cooperation Framework, often called the Petrodollar Agreement, formally expired on June 9, 2024, and was not renewed. While fact-checkers correctly note there was never a single signed treaty mandating dollar-only oil sales, the practical arrangement had been the foundation of dollar dominance for 5 decades. Its expiration freed Saudi Arabia to sell oil in any currency. Saudi Arabia's hedging strategy. Saudi Arabia is playing both sides. In 2023, Saudi Arabia signed a $7 billion currency swap agreement with China. In June 2024, the Saudi Central Bank formally joined the mBridge CBDC project alongside China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. Saudi Arabia participated in BRICS Plus discussions about alternative payment systems. Reports emerged of Saudi oil sales to China settled in yuan. Yet Saudi Arabia continues to accept American military protection, purchase US weapons systems, and maintain public alignment with Washington. This is not contradiction, it is leverage. Saudi Arabia is positioning itself to profit regardless of which system wins. If Saudi Arabia fully commits to yuan oil sales, the petrodollar is finished. Iran showed the world it could be done. Venezuela showed Saudi Arabia the cost of going too far. The message to Riyadh is clear. Hedge all you want, but do not cross the line. Larry Fink and the tokenization imperative BlackRock CEO Larry Fink has publicly stated the need to move rapidly toward tokenization, converting all stocks, bonds, and assets to digital tokens traded on blockchain platforms. The total value of global financial assets, stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, is approximately $300 trillion. This is the prize. System 1, the Western CBDC architecture, led by the Federal Reserve, ECB, and Bank of England in partnership with BlackRock and major financial institutions. Built on permissioned blockchains with digital dollars and euros. Features programmable money. Central banks could theoretically set expiration dates, restrict purchases, implement negative interest rates, and freeze accounts. Project Agora, a collaboration between 7 major central banks, is the Western Wholesale CBDC initiative. System 2, the BRICS mBridge. Alternative mBridge is a multi-central bank digital currency platform developed since 2019, initially under the Bank for International Settlements. It now connects China, Hong Kong, Thailand, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. In 2022, a pilot with real value transactions was conducted, over 160 payments totaling more than $22 million. By mid-2024, it reached minimum viable product stage. In October 2024, the BIS considered stepping back from the project as the BRICS summit discussed creating a BRICS bridge based on M-Bridge technology, a system that would allow BRICS nations to become partially independent of the US supervised financial system and SWIFT. By August 2025, Chinese state-owned and regional banks were executing cross-border payments on M-Bridge, signaling a transition from pilot to operational deployment. M-Bridge settles transactions in seconds rather than days, reduces costs by 50–70%, operates 24/7, requires no dollar intermediation, and bypasses SWIFT entirely. The race. The fundamental question of global finance in the 2020s is which system captures the $300 trillion when assets tokenize. If assets migrate to dollar-based CBDC platforms, America maintains financial dominance. If they migrate to yuan gold hybrid systems operating on M-Bridge and its successors, the dollar loses reserve status. Iran and Venezuela were the test cases proving the alternative works. That is why they had to be plugged. Historical precedent: empires and currency collapse. Rome debased its currency to fund the military. The currency collapsed. The empire collapsed. Britain tried to maintain empire by force during the 1956 Suez Crisis. America forced them to back down economically. Within 20 years, the pound lost reserve status. The British Empire ended. America's position today. America today carries over $36 trillion in national debt, runs approximately $2 trillion in annual deficits, and spends roughly $900 billion on defense annually. All of this is sustainable only because global dollar demand, driven by oil trade and reserve currency status, keeps borrowing costs manageable. If the petrodollar collapses, global demand for dollars falls, interest rates spike, as treasury bonds become unattractive, the government cannot finance deficits affordably, the dollar weakens severely, American living standards decline, military spending becomes unsustainable, and global influence evaporates. This is existential, and history shows that empires facing existential threats do not go quietly. The media ecosystem is the final piece. Epstein files get weeks of coverage. UFO hearings trend nationally. AI existential risk dominates discourse. Culture wars generate endless engagement. Coverage of the petrodollar's expiration? Almost nothing. Coverage of the $300 trillion tokenization race? Silence. Coverage of Venezuela's intervention as a petrodollar enforcement action? Buried under narco-terrorism framing. The distraction machine works because it gives people emotional content to consume, while the structural transformation of the global financial system happens in the background. So where does this end? Path 1. Escalation. America strikes Iran. The Strait of Hormuz closes. Oil spikes to $200 a barrel. Global recession. The leaks are plugged by force, but the cost is measured in blood and economic destruction. Path 2. Managed decline. America fails to plug all the leaks. The petrodollar slowly dies. The dollar loses reserve status. American living standards fall. The empire ends not with a bang, but a whimper. The $300 trillion question. When the greatest financial transition in human history happens, when all assets tokenize, where will you be positioned? The smart money is already moving. Gold is at all-time highs. Central banks are buying over 1,000 tons annually. Bitcoin surges as a digital alternative. Real assets appreciate as fiat currencies face structural decline. The power brokers are trying to preserve US dollar dominance at any cost. The wars, the invasions, the sanctions, they are all to keep you from the truth. All the value is converging into precious metals and soon the digital rails. Put your faith in God and He'll handle the rest. Hit the subscribe button for more untold histories.